Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld podcast. It is August 18th, 2019, and today's topic, Bakkt cleared to launch and Bitcoin market yawns. Well, it finally happened after well over a year of the announcement of the original plans for an entity known as Bakkt to offer a Bitcoin futures contract that would be physically settled in Bitcoin, has now announced a hard start date of September 23rd, a little over a month. And the idea of this company is that they will provide a place for institutional investors not only to trade the price of Bitcoin, but to have a place to store it if indeed they do wish to take delivery on their contract. Now, the market did not really react to this, but that's not that surprising given that over a month ago they started testing and they announced testing and they announced that they would have a launch date soon. So they now have a launch date. And there were a few interesting things in the announcement, but not enough to really push forward the price of Bitcoin. After all, this has been known for well over a year that this particular entity was coming to market. Now, the entity, for those of you who aren't aware, is significant in that it is comprised of the New York Stock Exchange, Microsoft, and Starbucks, and the Boston Consulting Group. And the goal of the entity is not only to provide a futures contract, which has physically delivered component, but also to have storage, and eventually to provide a mechanism whereby investors can spend their Bitcoin through places like Starbucks, not because Starbucks itself is going to accept the Bitcoin directly, but to come up with, I suppose, payment options whereby the Bitcoin can be converted. So they announced yesterday that these contracts have received the green light from the CFTC through the self-certification process. They've already begun user acceptance testing, and now they have approval from the New York State Department of Financial Services to create what's called Bakkt Trust Company, which will be a qualified custodian, and this warehouse will provide custody for the physically delivered futures, the Bitcoin that are related to those. Now, this is big because they now have a very large entity. They have the biggest stock exchange behind them. They've got one of the largest technology companies behind them, Microsoft, a very large point of sale company, Starbucks, and you now have approval from the New York State Department of Financial Services and somewhat of a blessing from the CFTC. Okay, now, what happened in the market? Some people were somewhat, I would say, surprised that there was little reaction in the market price, although there actually was. The price of Bitcoin probably rose 3% from a little under $10,000 to about $10,300, got up to $10,500, and then fell back to, I think currently right now it is at about $10,250. A bit of a boost, but nothing spectacular. And this announcement did come from Bakkt directly. It wasn't somehow through the back door or some rumor. This is an actual company announcement. Now, the other thing that's significant about the announcement is a lot of Bitcoin naysayers, no-coiners say that the government's going to shut it down. I've said now for a couple of years that, not that I've said it for a long time makes it any more correct, but it has been correct for now in hindsight of time, that really what the government wants, and Mnuchin said this, he's no fan of Bitcoin, but what they really want are regulations. They want their tax money, and they know that there's big money in it. There's certain financial institutions that have an interest in making money off of the back of this, and one of them is the New York Stock Exchange. Another one is Microsoft. We've seen Fidelity Investments getting involved. We see TD Ameritrade. We see Goldman Sachs getting involved with investments in Poloniex and Circle. So they don't want to shut it down, even if they don't like it. So I've never thought that they were going to shut it down. But with this, it further entrenches the fact that Bitcoin's not going anywhere. The CFTC has cleared it. The New York Department of Financial Services cleared. These are large mainstream entities. This isn't the Winklevoss twins, Gemini. This isn't a startup company like Coinbase This is the New York Stock Exchange, not just dipping their toe in the water, but putting a lot of money behind this. So let's take a look now at what does this mean for the markets. Well, we don't know, and Bakkt has kept its... They mentioned they had 150 people, clients, and so on meet with them a month or so ago. We don't know actually how many clients are testing the program, how many are actually going to come on board on September 23rd, how many are actually going to trade from there. We know that the CME Bitcoin futures contract has done over $1.5 billion in notional Bitcoin trading, I think, in July. So it's a large-ish. It's not that large market right now for at least that type of contract, the CME contract, which is basically cash settled. So we don't know how big Bakkt is going to be. They haven't told us how big. They're testing. They haven't really told us what they expect on day one, what they expect in 6 months. We haven't seen any projections. However, there was an interesting note in the announcement that they made. And what they were saying is they are not going to set the price or use the price based off of the current spot markets. So it says, uniquely, Bakkt Bitcoin futures contracts will not rely upon unregulated spot markets for settlement prices. That's basically the prices that you and I follow. Those are the unregulated spot prices, thus serving as a transparent price discovery mechanism for the benchmark price of Bitcoin. The importance of this differentiator is only amplified by reports of significant manipulation of the spot market activity and other concerns such as inconsistent anti-money laundering policies and weak compliance controls. So, it says Bitcoin futures will be exchanged, traded on ICE Futures US and cleared on ICE Clear US, which are federally regulated by the CFTC. Now, ICE is the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange. And it says regulated exchanges differ from trading platforms such as crypto spot markets in many respects, including risk management, compliance, and market surveillance. Now, these are all very important things to the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, when it comes time to approving a Bitcoin ETF. Bitwise and Van Eck have applied. They've gone through 2 periods where they've been postponed. The next one is coming up in the end of September and also in October. And one of the big complaints is, the 2 big complaints about approving a Bitcoin ETF. One was custody. I think they've solved that. I think the custody's been solved. Looks like Bakkt Warehouse for Bitcoin has been approved. Other companies have been approved. The real issue is whether there's manipulation on the markets. And Bitwise itself, in its application to the SEC, noted that most of the trading is indeed, false. A lot of spoofing, a lot of manipulation. But it did mention there's a number of exchanges that do have actual real trading. Now, it looks like Bakkt Bitcoin futures contracts are going to rely... we're not going to rely on the unregulated spot markets. So we may see a divergence now in these markets. And the other thing we may see, if Bakkt actually becomes one of the main trading places for not only futures, but physically delivered Bitcoin, it may become one of the main places where the bulk of Bitcoin trading takes place, in which case it may end up being one of the big, if not the price setting mechanism. Now remember, to date, most of Bitcoin trading on the markets has been through retail investors. If you get large money moving into Bitcoin, and when I say large money, I just mean a small portion of large money's assets, they will be buying and selling large amounts, and in effect, these volumes that Bakkt potentially could be handling in the future could be very, very significant, indeed to the point where they control the market. Don't really know that yet, but if that does happen, or whether it happens immediately or it begins to happen, that would give the SEC comfort on the market surveillance issue, the manipulation issue, because the Bakkt market will satisfy them on all of the issues they have on compliance, anti-money laundering, weak compliance, and not having the market surveillance that the SEC would need in order to understand the market and feel comfortable. Not that there's not going to be price switches, changes, and volatility, but that it's not going to be subject to overt or covert manipulation. So that's something I suppose is a positive for the idea of a Bitcoin ETF, because this is an institutional product. Now, it's not a security because it's handled, the CFTC has viewed Bitcoin as not as a security, but they view it as a commodity. The SEC views Bitcoin as a commodity, not as a security. However, the ETF itself, even though they consider Bitcoin a commodity, the underlying commodity in a Bitcoin ETF, Bitcoin, does not dictate that the CFTC should regulate it, even though Bitcoin is considered a commodity, because the investment vehicle, the ETF, is considered a security, and therefore it falls under the purview of, not Robert Mueller, but under the purview of the Securities Exchange Commission, because when you have an ETF, that investment vehicle is considered a security. It doesn't matter what the underlying asset is. Now, we mentioned that the price was muted. Now, why was the price muted? Well, we've kind of already covered a lot of it. First of all, it's old news. Bakkt has been announced for over a year. They only gave a launch date after many delays, and they've come to market a few times saying, we think we're ready, we're going to launch in a couple of months. Then they gave a hard date when they were going to test, and they met that date, and now they're saying they're going to launch. So none of this is really big news. I wouldn't say this is a buy on the rumor, sell on the news, because there is no rumor. They've known that Bakkt is coming, or at least has been lining up to be coming for quite some time now. I think this was just, okay, well, now we know. The real question with the date is, how successful will this be? How big is this whole Bakkt thing going to be? Also, there was no hype in it in that it didn't announce the Starbucks involvement in any way, shape, or form. One of the things they said was they were going to help make Bitcoin a medium of exchange and help adoption as a currency, and there was nothing in that announcement, just that they were going to start the trading, and they had cleared with the New York Financial Services Division and the CFTC to get that warehouse going and to get the trading going. They also didn't announce any plans for future tokens. Obviously, the first one would probably be Ethereum, then maybe Litecoin, but they didn't announce that. Also, Wall Street is away on vacation. They know about this. Generally, you'll see increased trading pick up across the board, stocks and bonds, when Wall Street comes back from the Hamptons. You still have that old archaic way. They go away for the summer. That's the old sell in May and go away. You come back in September refreshed, or at least ready to go, with new investment thesis on where you're going to start to put money to work, or whether you're going to pull money out of the market. So I think we'll see some movement in all the markets, obviously, after Labor Day weekend, when people come back and they start to get a sense of where they think the market is going to head, and then they start pushing it in that direction. Also, I think, I don't know if this was picked up very much, but I think that the idea that they're going to not use the prices off the unregulated markets, that could raise some concern that they're trying to be a price setter. Because remember, in the gold and silver markets, the CME group, basically the COMEX, defines the prices of those commodities, pretty much a price fix. Now, that may be a hard thing to do with the fact that they're coming late to the game here, and there's already regulated, unregulated exchanges out there. But given their size and scope, they could become a very key player, if not the player, in setting the price. And then, you can say, people, what about unregulated exchanges? What about peer-to-peer exchanges, decentralized exchanges? Yeah, you'll have those, and there's nothing stopping people from paying a different price. So for example, we see recently in Hong Kong, they're paying over the spot price of gold. India happens from time to time. And certainly people will trade on local Bitcoins and shapeshift, but they're not setting the prices. And they may trade at different rates. But still, I think that if the bulk of Bitcoin is trading through something like Bakkt, then they will somewhat wrest the price away from what we've seen to date are the price discovery mechanisms of the Bitstamp and Binance and Coinbase and OKCoin and so on. Also, as I mentioned, they didn't give any indication of the size of the interest. So there's some uncertainty. They could launch this thing and no one could show up. A few people could show up. We don't really know whether this is the, quote, game changer. It has the potential. You've got Starbucks, Microsoft, you've got New York Stock Exchange, ICE, Intercontinental Exchange behind it. There's surveys that say that there are institutions that are interested in this asset and so on, but there could be talk. Who knows? We don't know what the market will be like on September 23rd. If there's a market correction, or that may mean people would want to move into Bitcoin. It may mean, no, I don't want any risk assets. Or if the market starts to take off, they could say, well, I'm going to put the money more into stocks. So who knows what's going to happen on September 23rd and the months after. So I'm not surprised that the price did not skyrocket or really move in any particular way. I think it moved up a bit. It was almost a relief rally that, okay, there is going to be this Bakkt Bitcoin physically settled futures contract. But then again, there's also the idea, sometimes there's a delayed reaction to news that comes out on a Friday. But in general, nothing has happened other than confirmation of old news so far. So we'll have to wait and see. What do you all think about Bakkt? Whether it's going to be a success, what impact it will have on the price of Bitcoin, altcoins? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much.